Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of sources here, diving into the story of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City, looking specifically at its first 25 years, sort of leading up to 2014.
That's right. And we also have some biographical notes on its founder, Tim Keller, which adds context.
Yeah, so the materials are reflections from leaders, details on ministries, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Gives us a window into their thinking, their past, their future back then.
So the mission for this deep dive is to pull out the really key stuff. Redeemer's vision, how they approached ministry in a place like New York, what made it all work.
Basically give you, the listener, a shortcut to understanding this specific story using only these sources we have in front of us.
All right, we want to get the why and the how behind it, their origins, their philosophy, how it played out on the ground.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Where do we start?
The beginning.
Yeah.
Established 1989, right here in Manhattan.
And interestingly, Tim Keller founded it, but the sources say he initially said no. Yeah, someone named Terry Geiger had to persuade him. It started super small, too, maybe around 50 people.
Wow, 50 people. But the vision was big from the start.
Seems so. Very clear.
Okay.
A church in the city, for the city, and deliberately outward-facing.
And specifically aimed at people who, well, don't usually like church. That feels important.
Absolutely critical to their DNA, it seems, and kind of bold because the sources point out many churches were actually leaving cities then.
So they went against the grain, planted themselves right in Manhattan.
Yep. And that approach, that outward focus, seems connected to its growth.
The growth was pretty remarkable, wasn't it?
Yeah, by 2004, it's being called one of Manhattan's most vital congregations.
Yeah.
By 2008, the sources mention over 5,000 weekly attendance.
So what drove that, starting so small? What do the sources point to?
Well, definitely that outward vision, engaging skeptics, but maybe underpinning it all, there's this core philosophy the sources talk about.
Okay.
They call it being differently the same.
Differently the same. All right, let's
Yeah.
dig into that. What's the idea there?
The gist of it is that to stay true to your core beliefs, what they call the essence of Christian belief, the gospel, you actually have to be willing to change the forms.
Forms meaning, like styles, approaches.
Exactly. Styles, communication methods, how you structure things, especially in a city like New York that's always changing. It's not about watering down the core message.
But changing how you present it, how you live it out.
Precisely. The same part, according to the sources, includes being evangelical in the Reformed Presbyterian tradition, so specific theological roots,
Okay.
being gospel-centered, not moralistic or relativistic, loving the city realistically, holistic ministry word and deed, poor and marginalized cultural engagement, being outward-facing to skeptics, and cooperating with others.
That's quite a list for the same part.
It is, and the differently part is adapting everything else. They explicitly mention avoiding making the Redeemer of the past an idol.
That's insightful, recognizing that what worked before might not work now.
Yeah. And this philosophy led to a big strategic move, becoming a family of congregations. The sources mentioned 3 distinct congregations by 2014.
And the idea there was,
Well, it allows for variety, different styles, maybe different focuses for different neighborhoods or groups, but all sharing that core gospel DNA. It's a way to adapt and grow without losing the center.
makes sense, scaling while staying flexible. Now, another thing the sources really emphasize, even before day one, is prayer.
Oh, absolutely. Described as born in prayer. It mentions Tim Keller spending 2 years really seeking a deeper prayer life before he even agreed to start the church.
Wow, and then there was that early support, not just money, like that $75K gift,
The women of the church love gift, yeah.
but prayers from women in hundreds of churches. The sources seem to connect a lot of the early vitality to that.
They really do. They talk about the perceived effects, like a tangible sense of God's presence, the gospel feeling brand new, sleepy Christians awoke, conversions happening every week. One source even says the air was charged with a kind of electricity. They frame this early energy as flowing directly from that foundation of prayer.
That's powerful language. What did that look like practically in the early days?
Well, besides the overall atmosphere, the early coordinating team met every Friday morning just for prayer, and they'd share stories about engaging non-Christians. So prayer was tied directly to the mission.
But the sources also mention that later on, maybe the church wasn't always known as a praying church, even if a core group kept at it.
Right. There was a renewed focus on prayer around the 25th anniversary.
Why the renewed push? What do the sources say about why prayer remains so crucial?
It connects back to Keller's view of prayer itself. He saw it as, well, essential for several reasons. It's how we often receive God's gifts. Blessings require asking. It's key to knowing ourselves and knowing God.
Yeah.
And critically, it's the main way we experience deep change because it reorders the loves of our heart, as he put it. It's the engine for inner transformation that makes ministry effective.
And the sources link Keller's own cancer experience to his prayer life deepening too.
Yes, facing mortality was pivotal for him personally, which reinforces how central prayer was, not just organizationally, but personally for the leader.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to another core element. That outward focus on reaching skeptics, described as a laser focus.
Absolutely central from the beginning. The goal wasn't just internal terror, it was about reaching those who don't like church.
And what was the danger if they lost that focus, according to the sources?
Becoming a Christian club, where the language, the culture, everything becomes insider-focused, basically unintelligible to outsiders. The members' needs can just drown out the effort needed to connect with non-believers.
So that differently part of the philosophy was vital here. How do they actually try to design things for skeptics?
It was intentional, thinking about communication visuals, music, relationships, designing it to be welcoming and understandable for someone unfamiliar with church, but still meaningful for members.
And there's some stories in the sources that illustrate this, right? Like Tom Jennings.
Yeah, that's a great example. He brought musician friends who thought Christianity was, well, absurd. But they were surprised.
Oh, so.
They heard jazz music, which they liked. The sermon struck them as intelligent and moving. And then, this seems key, Tim Keller stayed after for an hour, just taking questions from skeptics, engaging their doubts directly and respectfully.
That Q&A part sounds huge.
It was pivotal for Jennings. He realized, okay, I can actually bring my friends here. It felt safe for doubters.
And that ties into Keller's broader work in apologetics, making a reasoned case for faith.
Definitely. His book, The Reason for God, came directly out of those conversations and objections heard in NYC. The sources describe his approach as respectful, engaging with modern questions, influenced by people like C.S. Lewis.
There's another story too, Melanie Penn's.
Right. She came to NYC searching, had a spiritual crisis after 9/11. Redeemer was the only church she'd heard of.
And what happened?
She describes a pretty classic conversion experience during a sermon, feeling convicted. The Bible was true, Jesus was real, and her life changed. And she hoped, years later, that Redeemer was still that kind of place for searching people.
So these stories really bring that skeptic focus to life. But the vision went beyond just conversion, right? It was about engaging the whole city.
Yes, holistically. The vision was for the city to flourish spiritually, socially, culturally, for everyone's benefit, church members and the city alike.
And several key ministries embodied this. Let's start with Mercy and Justice, the diaconate.
This started really early in 1991, focused squarely on people's practical needs, not church property or assets. Modeled on Dutch Reformed churches, apparently.
And the scale was pretty significant.
Huge. Sources mention $4.3 million in direct financial aid to over 1,500 congregants over 23 years. But it was way more than just cash.
Right. What else?
Spiritual and emotional support, prayer teams after services, care groups for specific needs like divorce or older adults, plus practical stuff like food pantries, clothing closets, help finding jobs.
And this was mostly volunteer-run, these deeks.
Yeah, 244 trained volunteers over the years, called deeks, carving out time from their regular jobs, supported by special offerings. And this ministry really ramped up during citywide crises.
Like 9/11, the 2008 recession, Hurricane Sandy.
Exactly. It showed they were there for the city in tough times, serving beyond just their own members.
Seems like a clear application of biblical teaching.
The sources connect it directly to Acts 6, leaders ensuring practical needs are met, and historically to Christians serving neighbors during plagues based on commands like loving your neighbor.
Okay, then there was the Center for Faith and Work, CFW.
Right, started in 2003. This was explicitly about strengthening that outward focus by helping people integrate their faith with their work. What most people spend most of their time doing.
So not just don't do bad things at work, but something more positive.
Much more. The idea is the gospel renews everything, individuals, communities, the world, and that includes our work lives. Grace is active in addressing brokenness in our jobs and industries.
Especially in a place like New York where work is so central.
Exactly. Work shapes everything. And it's often broken. The gospel, they argued, is big enough to address that brokenness because God is making all things new.
So how did CFW equip people?
By helping them see the gospel's relevance to their specific fields. When Christians scatter into workplaces across the city with this perspective, it changes motivations, humanizes relationships, connects daily work to God's purposes.
And the sources show some results by 2013.
Yeah, things like the business plan competition, funding gospel-centered ventures went from 0 sponsored winners to 50. And the Gotham Fellows program, theological training for professionals, grew significantly. Tangible efforts to equip people for their specific callings.
And the third major ministry area mentioned is Redeemer Counseling Services, RCS.
Also started very early, just a year in, as an extension of pastoral care.
And it grew substantially, the sources say.
Especially after 9/11, staff doubled. By 2014, over 30 counselors, seeing hundreds of clients weekly, offering group therapy, medication management. Pretty remarkable scale for a church ministry.
And it served beyond Redeemer's members.
Yes, that was key to the vision of renewing the city. They served people from other churches, opened satellite locations, even started something in Philly.
And interestingly, even unchurched people started coming.
Right, which suggests they built credibility, offering a unique brand of counseling that engaged the culture while being distinctively Christian. They even partnered with Yeshiva University for an outcome study.
Trying to bridge the professional and the pastoral.
Exactly. They called it a gospel-centered approach, using insights from psychology within a framework drawn from Scripture, aiming for the best integration.
Okay, so those ministries show deep engagement in the city.
Oh,
But the vision also looked beyond the city, right? Multiplication.
definitely. Looking ahead to the next 25 years, the vision explicitly included sending out their best people to plant new churches, all over the city and globally, too.
And this connects to that idea about the limited evangelistic lifespan of a church plant, that risk of turning inward after a few decades.
Seems like that was part of the thinking. To stay outward focused, you need to keep planting. This led to Redeemer City to City, or CTC, around 2002-2003.
And CTC's goal.
To basically translate the Redeemer model, skeptic-friendly, gospel-centered urban ministry to other major global cities.
And it took off.
Apparently so. By 2014, the sources say CTC had helped start or support over 300 churches in 65 cities worldwide. They ran training programs, like bringing pastors to NYC for intensive residencies.
And this became a major focus for Keller later on.
Yes, after he stepped down as senior pastor in 2017, his main work shifted to training leaders and church planting through CTC.
So there's the outward reach. But what about community within Redeemer? The sources touch on families, too.
Right. It started very young and single, only 3 families early on, including the Kellers. But over time, a vision grew for nurturing families committed to staying and serving in New York long term.
And specific programs developed.
Yeah, things like moms groups, Redeemer Family Ministries, premarital seminars, parenting workshops, practical support for navigating family life in the city through a gospel lens.
And the demographics shifted.
Significantly, between 2004 and 2013, the number of families with kids grew a lot. By 2014, around 400 families, 500 kids in Sunday programs, a whole generation growing up in the church and the city.
And this internal community building wasn't just navel-gazing.
No, the sources link it to increased engagement overall. Volunteer rates doubled for Sunday teams, and for Hope for New York, that nonprofit arm mobilizing volunteers in grants for mercy and justice work across the city.
So internal health fueled external mission.
That seems to be the idea.
Okay, so looking back from that 25-year mark in 2014, the feeling wasn't mission accomplished.
Not at all, more like the start of something, not the end. The focus was already on the next 25 years.
And acknowledging the ongoing challenge.
Yes, finding those new and creative ways to connect with unbelievers visually, musically, relationally, while also nurturing the existing community. Described as a tremendous balancing act.
That tension between outward focus and inward care seems constant.
It does, but there was also this stated belief that God would see the work through and hope for the future.
And the hope that the church, while looking different in many ways, would remain the same at its core. Back to that central idea.
Exactly. Differently the same.
And through this whole story runs the thread of Tim Keller himself. The sources paint a picture of him as pastor, author, theologian, apologist.
Key figure. Founding pastor, co-founder of City to City. His books hit the New York Times bestseller list. Reason for God, Prayer, Prodigal God, giving him a wide reach.
His background included seminary teaching, specifically urban ministry, right?
Yes. Degrees from Bucknell, Gordon Conwell, Westminster. That academic and practical background shaped his approach.
And the focus on young urban professionals was very intentional.
Believing they influence culture. The sources note Redeemer's demographics were unusual for a megachurch. Lots of singles, over 40% Asian American, many in arts and finance.
His preaching style gets highlighted too.
Described as intelligent, moving, tackling hard truths, but without being shrill, engaging.
And politically, the sources say he tried to carve out a centrist path.
Yeah, critiquing both parties, avoiding explicit endorsements, which resulted in a more politically mixed congregation. He argued for things like caring for the poor directly from the Bible.
He also preferred the term orthodox to evangelical.
Right, due to the political baggage the evangelical label had picked up, he identified theologically with Calvinism. A key concept in his teaching was this gospel third way.
Explain that a bit.
It contrasts the gospel message not just with atheism or secularism, irreligion, but also with performance-based religion, traditional religion, trying to earn God's favor.
And the famous summary captures that.
Yes. We are more sinful and flawed than we ever dared believe yet. More loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. That paradox was apparently central.
Another major theme was idolatry.
Huge theme, drawing on Luther and Calvin, but applying it to modern life, seeing things like money, career, sex, power as ultimate things, taking God's place.
Which connects directly back to the Center for Faith and Work.
Absolutely. Addressing those idols as they play out in professional and cultural life. His books, Every Good Endeavor and Center Church, explored this cultural engagement piece.
His influence also grew through co-founding the Gospel Coalition and mentoring leaders globally,
which became his main focus after stepping down as senior pastor in 2017, pouring into training and planting via CTC.
And personally, that experience with cancer deeply affected his prayer life, as the sources note.
Thyroid cancer in 2002, then pancreatic cancer diagnosed in 2020. He passed away in May 2023. That struggle clearly shaped him.
So his life story is really woven into the fabric of the church's story.
Absolutely. His thinking, his journey, his leadership were integral.
Okay, so pulling this all together from these sources, what we've seen is this journey of one church, planted in New York, growing significantly over 25 years.
And wrestling with big questions along the way. How to stay true to your core while adapting to a changing city. How to balance outreach with internal community. How faith connects to work, culture, justice.
It seems driven by a clear vision, prayer, specific ministries, and that willingness to be differently the same, all based, of course, just on the materials we reviewed today.
Right. It's a specific snapshot based on these anniversary reflections and biographical details.
And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? For you, the listener.
Yeah.
If that core challenge for any lasting endeavor, church, business, project, even personal growth, is to remain differently the same.
Preserving the essence while constantly adapting the methods and forms.
What does that principle challenge you to think about, or maybe even change in what you're pursuing, something to mull over?